It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Four friends, Mark, Jake, Tom, and Eric, set out to explore Black Hollow Forest, a place steeped in legends. Stories of missing hikers, strange voices, and shadowy figures had been whispered through generations. But none of them gave these tales any credence. They had their maps, their supplies, and a sense of adventure. They laughed at the warnings, but the forest had no interest in their laughter. The hike began easily, the path winding through towering trees that seemed to swallow the sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the forest's silence wrapped around them like a blanket. As they ventured deeper, the trees grew denser, their trunks thicker and the air heavier. The trail became less distinct, and an unsettling sensation began to creep over them. Though they carried on, they could not ignore the feeling that something was watching, something unseen. As the sun began to sink, they set up camp near a slow-moving river, the sound of the water joining the crackle of their fire. They sat in the warm glow, their laughter and light conversation filling the space between them. The night, despite the growing darkness, felt peaceful. Everything was normal until a faint whisper moved through the trees. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a gust of wind, but it had a strange, almost human quality. A low murmur that stirred something deep within. Mark was the first to notice it. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. At the very edge of the clearing, a tall, thin figure appeared, just barely visible in the shadows. It was as if it had no face, just a void where one should be. For a fleeting moment, Mark thought it was a trick of the firelight, but the figure didn't vanish. It stood there, unmoving, until it was no longer there at all. The whispers continued throughout the night, soft and indistinct, weaving through the trees. At times, they sounded as though they were circling the campsite, moving in ways that defied nature. The wind did not carry them. They existed on their own, separate from the world around them. The noise was not of this world. As sleep came in fits, the whispers grew bolder. Something else followed, a scratching sound, slow and deliberate, like something dragging along the fabric of the tents. The noise wasn't wind or rain. It was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. It seemed to come from all sides at once, too rhythmic, too purposeful. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the night grew heavier. When dawn finally broke, the world seemed eerily still. The fire had long since died, leaving only cold ashes. The river flowed silently beside them, yet the quiet weighed heavily. The forest felt as though it had been holding its breath. They packed their things quickly, eager to leave the uncomfortable silence behind. But when they looked around, they found that the path they had followed was gone. The trees had closed in, their trunks too thick, their branches too tangled. Every direction they took brought them back to their campsite. The forest had changed. They were trapped. Panic set in as they searched for any sign of the trail. But the more they walked, the more the forest seemed to shift, as if it were alive, shifting its own boundaries to keep them within its grasp. They moved in circles, disoriented, the trees around them growing taller and closer. The air was suffocating, and each step brought them no closer to escape. The forest was now a maze. And then, one of them vanished. Tom was there one moment, and the next, he was gone. It was as though the forest itself had simply swallowed him whole. No sound, no movement, just an empty space where he had been standing. The others looked in every direction, calling his name, but the forest absorbed their voices, offering nothing in return. As they searched frantically, calling again and again, The laughter began. It was low and deep, rising from somewhere deep within the forest, a sound unlike anything they had ever heard. It seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing through the trees, a sound that twisted the air and sent shivers down their spines. The trees shifted as if reacting to the sound, their branches creaking in unnatural rhythms. Before they could fully comprehend what was happening, Jake disappeared. One moment he was by their side, the next he was gone, vanished without a trace. Not a sound, not a struggle. He was simply not there anymore. The forest had taken him, and there was nothing they could do. Only Mark and Eric were left now, both filled with terror and exhaustion, their feet moving through the thick underbrush without purpose. The whispers grew louder, clearer now. They could hear the voices of their lost friends calling to them, but there was something else, something darker, something wrong. The voices of Tom and Jake echoed, their tones unnatural, distorted. It was as though they were calling from a place far beyond the physical world. Eric collapsed in the growing darkness, his body too tired to continue. Mark tried to lift him, dragging him along, though neither of them knew where they were going anymore. The trees closed in, blocking their view of anything beyond the next few steps. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no way out. Then, without warning, Eric was torn from Mark's grasp, yanked backward into the shadows. Mark saw the terror in his friend's eyes before the darkness swallowed him whole. And then, Mark was truly alone. The whispers wrapped around him, taunting him, filling his mind with the sound of their voices. The forest seemed to pulse with life, a living, breathing thing. Mark's feet moved on their own, driven by fear. But no matter how fast he ran, the trees only grew thicker, the shadows deeper. Every turn he took led him further into the twisting maze. But then, at the edge of the forest, he saw it. A break in the trees, a faint line of pavement cutting through the darkness. It was a road, and it seemed to be the only way out. He staggered forward, his legs trembling beneath him, and collapsed onto the cold, hard surface. The night air was still, but the forest loomed behind him, watching. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter, closer. A truck screeched to a halt, and a figure stepped out, but Mark could barely focus on him. His mind was clouded with the terror of the forest. He turned, half expecting to see nothing, but instead he saw them, Tom, Jake, and Eric, standing at the edge of the woods, staring at him with twisted smiles. Their eyes were black voids, and their mouths stretched into grins far too wide for any human face. Mark's heart skipped a beat. The world around him seemed to close in, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. The truck driver called out, but the words were meaningless. Mark tried to move, but his legs would not respond. The forest had claimed him, just as it had taken his friends. The last thing Mark saw before everything went dark was the distorted figures of his friends, stepping forward, their arms reaching out to welcome him home. By morning, the truck remained by the side of the road, its engine idling, but there was no driver, no passenger, no sign of anyone who had been there. The road was empty. The forest stood silent as though nothing had happened at all. Yet, if one stood at the tree line and listened closely, the wind carried whispers, soft, beckoning, calling for the next soul foolish enough to enter.